Right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. Now, this topic is arguably one of the most in-demand topics that we ever have. I think it's fair to say, isn't it, Graham?
I think it is, yeah. It's and an interesting topic today. Well, they're all interesting, but an interesting topic, and as you say, it's something I think we talk about a lot, don't we?
Yeah, and it's really really about how do we deal with people, how do we interact, and how do we make the most of the relationships that we have without letting the politics kind of get in the way. Is that fair, Graham?
I think it is, yeah. And I think the other thing, as obviously we'll explore more as we get into the content, is I think everyone has it. Well, I say everyone, a lot of people have this. We hear the word office politics or the phrase office politics, and it triggers some stuff for us. And I think what's good from the work we've done previously is when we, I think, explore some of that and unpick some of the myths of it, which I know we're going to move on to look at in the session today. So yeah, I think it's relationships is key to the game of office politics.
Okay, let's dive into some statistics then, shall we? We've already been kind of showcasing those as part of the intro screen, but what we've learned is from the research that we've done is 85% of people have experienced workplace politics in some form or another. Now, I've got to be honest, I think that's low. I can't believe there are 15% of people walking around having never experienced this. But hey, if those places exist, I'd certainly like to go and work in them. 44% of managers, and this for me is quite concerning if we're trying to work together, if we are one team, but 44% of managers admit to withholding or manipulating data in order to influence decisions. Now, equally, I can't say that I haven't done some of that stuff in terms of perhaps over-egging the pudding in terms of proposal to my boss years gone by to try and get a decision through that I needed. But I think hardly what we want, and we want to work together. Sorry, Graham.
Some of that's the intent, isn't it? The intent behind doing it, which again I know we'll look at. But when managers do some of that stuff, what's the reason they're doing it?
Yes, absolutely. Let's look at another one. 31% reduction in cross-functional resource sharing. So we're holding stuff back. We're hoarding. Maybe some of that's about protecting our own space, protecting our own performance, protecting our own teams. But the question is, how is that impacting the greater good and what we're trying to do? 40% of employees will consider leaving a highly political environment. And that's quite important when you think how much it costs to replace somebody. I mean, conservatively, I think it's something like 150% of salary.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal amount to recruit and train and get somebody back up and running to the level that a leaving person was performing at. And I think that's interesting because it ties in with the next one as well, doesn't it? That there's a 18% people says their intention to leave, and from a turnover point of view, there's kind of another 18% of people who their intentions to move on are due to office politics. Again, the next into the 29% of employees feel that, and again, I think this phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I think this 29% is interesting because like nearly a third of people agree with that in organizations, that it's not how you do stuff and how you operate and how you work. It's all about who you know. And again, I know we'll share some stuff around that later. The other one, next one I think is interesting, that 42% of people, if employees in organizations are actively disengaged, so they're switching off due to the stuff that they're seeing around them. And again, if I think back in terms of my career, that's been me at times. I've not wanted to play the game, and I've seen or I felt an impact of that. So therefore, I've disengaged. I've not worked in the way that I typically would want to work. And then the final one, that a third of workers are unhappy in their roles, and the third that kind of cites office politics as a major contributor. So clearly there's an impact. Clearly office politics has an impact, and particularly in the stats we see there, quite a lot of it's a negative impact.
Yeah, which is probably why it's one of our most requested pieces of content. It's our most downloaded piece of content, and we want to share that with you today. So, as we say, today's all about how do we navigate office politics. The fact they exist is one thing, but how do we navigate them? And we're going to unpick that today. And in this session,
we've got quite a packed session, Ricky, haven't we? So as always, we've got that. We're going to start by looking at what office politics is, and I know we're going to have a conversation about, is it office politics or actually is it organisational politics? We'll talk about that. We're going to look at the impact it has. We've already seen some of that from the stats that we've seen, and I guess from the practical side of things, and how can we navigate the politics that we see around us. And as always, we'll finish with a Q&A. For those that are familiar with the way we run the sessions, we're going to finish with a Q&A. But along the way, if you've got any questions, then feel free to drop them in the chat. All we ask is you put a little Q at the beginning so we know it's a question, and one of us will keep an eye on the chat depending on kind of who's talking at any given time. We're going to get involved with some Slido, so looking for your views and your thoughts as we go along in the session.
And we've also created, as we do for all of our webinars, we want to make them practical. We want to make them impactful for you to be able to do something with the content that we share. And Graham and I have built a toolkit book, and we'll share how you get your hands on that at the end. So stay tuned for that free giveaway that will be available. As we say later in the session, we'll show you how to get your hands on that. So thank you, Graham. That's for anybody who's new to us and what we do. Thinking Focus are all about behavior change. We put mindset at the center of everything we do, because individuals and teams have self-belief. They're limited. They have these limited thoughts that hold them back. And we help them uncover that. We help them get through that. We adopt a win or learn mindset and viewing failure as a way to grow, as a way to move forward. We reframe attitudes, turning problems into solutions. Not necessarily we have the answers, but we have what we call a solution-focused mindset. We test assumptions, challenge biases, overcome self-imposed limitations, as I've said. And we want to help people be more proactive and constructive when they're challenging their organization to be better tomorrow than they are today. Always about progress. And we see so many teams struggle. And we have a privileged position, I think, in that we get to work with lots of organizations. These are just some of the people that we're working with, to give you a sense of the breadth of customer that we work with. We've been going since 2016. We've worked with over 10,000 participants, have been through one or many of our different kind of programs, from classroom-based to webinars to virtual delivery. And we've probably coached upwards of 5,500 hours of coaching in that time as well. And we've got a big subscriber base, both on LinkedIn and an even bigger one on YouTube, with over 110,000 people subscribed to our channel there. So we've got some experience, and we've got some high impact clients that we've worked with as well. So we're really privileged in the work that we do. Let's get back though to the topic of office politics, shall we, Graham?
Yeah, and I just had a little thought actually as the list of people we work with came up, and I know there's a lot more sits behind it, but you think about kind of the size of some of the organizations. We work with kind of local organizations. I mean, one I've been working with recently, they've got like 110 staff, so we work with very small organizations through to those large multinational ones. And my guess is, regardless of the size of the organization, they're all going to have some politics at play in some shape or form. I don't think it's limited to it. We perhaps think it's worse in big organisations, but I think everybody experienced it. So let's look at that. Let's involve you now, kind of everyone listening in or watching in. We're going to get you involved with a little Slido. So coming up on the screen is a QR code. If you'd like to scan that, it should bring you up with a question that you see. So when you hear the phrase office politics, what does it make you think about? So when you hear the phrase office politics, what does it make you think about? That might be a word, it might be a phrase.
Slyness, backstabbing.
Well, yeah, I clocked that. That's interesting. Bear in mind where we're going to go a little bit later on. We think about sly as a fox, backstabbing, people working to their own agendas. We struggle to get stuff done, perhaps as a result of not very good at it. It's about confrontation. Any last thoughts if people want to drop them in? So there's a few themes, Erica, that we know we're going to touch on in some shape or form as we go through the rest of the webinar.
Yeah, and I think really what we wanted to do was, and you've captured it beautifully in that little Slido word cloud that we've created, that office politics is all about the variety of activities associated with influencing. It's what we do when we want to move something in our direction, whether it's improving personal or organizational interests. That's when it's used well. It's when it's used for individual gain, and we're protecting our own interest, is where it potentially becomes a problem. And we'll explore that and unpick that. Whilst we tend to think of it as something negative, it is how we get stuff done, though.
I think you're right there, Ricky. And it was interesting seeing the word cloud and the focus of that, and where we tend to think about office politics or organizational politics. But my guess is we've all used it, whether we know it or not. We've all used it at some stage.
Yeah, I mean, who hasn't created a situation where they're presenting their interests over and above? Because let's face it, we're all under pressure to deliver against our goals and objectives, and in order to do that, we need resources to do it. And our organizations are not blessed with a whole team of resources just to come in and help when needed. We're all probably fighting for the same skills, the same knowledge, and in order to move things forward, and therefore we can create these bottlenecks, we can create obstacles of our own making, and we need to be able to influence and make things happen. And when we don't make things happen, guess what? We come under pressure. Our bosses start to ask questions that goes, well, why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you making the progress? So we have to develop these skills in order to get stuff done, in order to hit our goals. The question is always about what is the best use of those resources for the organization? And that's where our bosses come in, that says, this is the highest priority right now, and how do we make that happen? But sometimes those that are more political or able to influence using their skills often get their way, even though it might not be the right thing right now.
Yeah. And I think that there are some, when we talk about office politics or organization politics, there are some myths. We're going to highlight three of those. So there are kind of three myths I think that we often see with office politics, or I guess they're beliefs that people have almost. But the first one being either you can be a good person or you can play at politics. So that kind of either or, the binary decision comes in. And I think, as we've just seen, because a lot of us view these kind of political agendas as negative, we believe that if we're part of them, we can't be a good person. But I think, like most things we see in the workplace, office politics can be used either for good, or it can be used unethically. And I guess it's that unethical use of it we often see. I remember a guy once telling me he was very Machiavellian, and he was quite proud of it. Now, the first thought to me is, if you're telling me you're Machiavellian, that's not very Machiavellian. But when I saw him in action, and he didn't need to tell you that he was, because he wasn't very good at it. He did stuff, and you could clearly see it was for his own interest. And I think that's typically what we look at. So I mean, as an example, imagine you've got a big meeting coming up. You're going to decide projects to invest in, and one of those projects is your own. Those people that are savvy at office politics understand things like, assuming the project's good for the overall business aims and objectives as well. So it's not a kind of just a pet project I've got. I think people that are politically savvy in that way, they understand that it's part of the process is getting, the agreement of other stakeholders or engaging other people. And engaging people before the big meeting can be a really positive thing to do, because when you present your idea or present your project, you're more likely to get people on board with it. And that kind of thing actually is an ethical use of politics, because whilst you've got your own agenda in mind, you've also got the agendas of others, and you've got an eye to what your organisational needs. So I think the first myth we can dispel is, if you're playing office politics from an ethical point of view, and maybe it's not the word playing actually itself is a word that causes concern, you can still be a good person. It's that fundamental, why are you doing it? What's the reason that you're doing it?
Yeah, it's all about, I think you used the word early doors, didn't you, in terms of intent?
Yes.
Is our intent for the greater good? Is our intent to move the organisation forward? Or is it about my goals, my targets, my team, which isn't necessarily thinking about the greater good? Yes, you're doing your bit, but if that's at the impact, the negative impact of everybody else, then that's not necessarily the best use. But it's really hard when you're the one that's being appraised and being evaluated for your delivery, for your performance.
Yes, definitely. So what's the next myth then we're going to dispel, Ricky?
Next one. Well, this is all about politics don't affect your job performance or career. So while we might think about that we can get through our careers without needing to play the political game, the reality is you probably do. You probably need to understand how decisions are made. You need to understand how things work around here. And you'll find that if you don't, as we said in myth one, everybody else will get the resources and you'll be left to struggle. You'll be playing along. So the reality is, you need to work out who's going to decide your promotion. You're going to need to work out who's going to decide on what opportunities you might get exposed to. And that is about politics. It's about understanding who's who, what's what, and how do you get a part of that, particularly if you want to grow, if you want to develop. If you're happy where you are, then let the others around you do that work. But actually, if you've got a level of ambition and a level of growth that you want to attain in your career, then you've got to work out how decisions get made. And the reality is, if you're not shouting about you and your work, who is?
Yeah.
And I think you've got a personal example of this, haven't you, Greg?
Yeah, I know. When we were preparing for this, I shared an example, and it's one that I share a lot actually in the work that we do, because I think it's a really good example that I worked in banking first part of my career, and I managed half a region in the East Midlands region, and a colleague of mine, a guy called Peter, managed the other half of the region. And what was really interesting was, my belief was, and I guess it comes from school days, that if you work really hard, the results speak for themselves and people know what you're doing. And so I would go in, the times I was in our regional office, I would go in, I'd sit down, I'd get on with my work, and my results, I thought, spoke for myself. What Peter was really good at doing was every time he was in, he would go and see Paul, who was one of our directors, and he'd go and spend time with Paul, and he'd share with Paul what he was doing, and I observed this behaviour going on, and I didn't follow suit. But one day Paul called me and he said, "Graham, we need to have a little conversation." And he sat me down and he started by saying, "Graham, I don't know what you're doing." And I went, "Sorry." He went, "No, I know you're doing stuff." He said, "Don't get me wrong." He said, "But what I'm not aware of is what is it that you're doing that's getting the results that you're getting." He said, "You never tell me." He said, "So I look at the results, I know in the areas you're responsible for, they're performing." He said, "But what Peter's really good at is he'll come in and he'll tell me what he's done that's driven those results." And in essence, what he was saying to me is, you need to be more like Peter. And that was, I guess, the first time I realised that I was potentially limiting my career by not talking about the things that I was doing that's getting the results, and assuming that in business, as in school, your results speak for yourself. So it was quite a good wake up call for me to have, and I think it reinforces for me what Peter was really good at doing. He went on to be very successful in the bank we worked at. He's kind of followed his career through finance, and he's still incredibly successful in what he does. But he understood that your results, you can't just assume your results will speak for yourself. So I guess that myth of, office politics won't affect my career. Actually, if you're not good at recognizing the key players and promoting yourself, it could.
Well, and I think given the climate that we're in right now, I think this is probably even more important, because there are organizations that are laying off people all over the world, and the reality is, if they don't know what you do, using your example, Graham, who are they going to pick?
Yeah.
Is it you, who they're not sure about? Whereas actually in this example, Peter is the one that's not just doing the work, but he's showing what he's doing, how he's doing it, and the impact that that's having. So there's an element of self-promotion. And I think the reality is, it's about balance. This isn't about go all in, placards and sandwich boards around saying this is what I'm doing and all those sorts of things. It's about carefully working out who needs to know, who's making the decisions. So if there are layoffs, actually everybody's clear that you don't not only know what you're doing, you're having an impact, and you know how to share some of that stuff, so that you're not the one necessarily that is left exposed because you're not perhaps as promotional about yourself and your performance as perhaps some of your colleagues.
And I guess the other thing, the other thing to acknowledge was that Peter and I were probably equally as skilled as each other. We were both getting results. He just happened to be better at letting people know what he was doing to get the results. So and I think that leads us nicely on to the third myth, that we might have this belief that we can get through life and we can escape office politics. I'm guessing, as we're probably starting to realise by now, we can't. And there's some research done by Bowman and Deal, kind of the two guys behind the research. They were kind of looking at a book on various different landscapes within organisations, and one of them was the political side of things. But they hit the nail on the head. I think when they through their research, what they stated was, the question isn't whether organisations will have politics, but rather it's what kind of politics will they have. So kind of when we're working in an organisation, accept that they're going to be there, but work out what kind of politics they are. We are naturally, as humans, we're social creatures. That use of relationships, the informal influence, and even power plays is part of how we engage, and always has been, whether that's for better or worse. And I think what we're driving through with this is, how do we use these things for better, not for worse, for our own benefit, but also the benefit of others, and the benefit of the organisation that we work for. So knowing that those politics are all around us, let's look at some of the impacts of some of that stuff then, and how do we help people be more politically savvy, if that's the phrase we want to use. So again, oh god, so again, if you want to get your phones out, there's another question on the screen for you. How do we feel about office politics?
Where is clearly a common word.
Yeah. What was anxious? It's hard. Hate them. So some very scared. So some very strong emotive words coming through, which I think we'd probably expect, Ricky, wouldn't we?
Yeah, well, I think the thing about office politics for me is it's one of those things that you kind of, we know it's going on. 85% have had this, by the way. So we know it's going on. It's what are the things I can do? What are the tools available to me? How do I do this, but do it, to your point earlier, ethically? How do I do it to help me and my team and the organization deliver against what it needs to deliver? And I think that, anxious, is it anxious from I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to work or exist in an environment that's highly political? Do I feel like there's point scoring and therefore that makes me feel like, well, I can't compete in that world and all of those things? But I think when you boil it down, there are practical things that you can do. And I think the good news is we've got some tools for you. In fact, we're going to give you an insight into 5 things. And like I said at the beginning, we've got a toolkit that is underpinned by some of these things as well to help you. So there's some of the stuff we're going to share today and some of the stuff that you can actually bring to life and start to practice and develop. And the thing about this is it does take practice and it does take some commitment to having a go, recognizing that the more you do it, the better it will become and the easier it'll become. And it will stop feeling, anxious. It will stop feeling perhaps so scary around that. So just thank you for your contribution.
There's a comment in the chat from Megan. For me, I get anxious about job security. I know I'm not good at them, so for my security, I'd rather not get involved. So kind of again that that if I'm seen to be playing office politics, will it impact? And I guess Megan, kind of picking up on the comment from earlier, depends how we do it. If you go back to my comment about the guy that's Machiavellian, if people recognise that's what you're doing, and 9 times out of 10 we find that out, or it becomes apparent that's what's happening, then yeah, it might affect us from a job security point of view if we're doing it. And some of the things we're going to move on to look at now, if we can use some of the tools with good intent, and it's linked in with overarching what the organization's doing, and it's got positive impact on people, then actually I guess what we'd argue is it's more likely to have the opposite effect and to help you in your role. So let's explore a little bit more then, Ricky. Should we start by actually that comment that came out in the first Slido, that someone used the word sly?
Yes. So thank you, Megan, for your comment, by the way. And if anybody else has got any thoughts or observations, drop them in the chat and we'll bring them out and we'll explore them. But there was some work done by a couple of researchers, Badley and James. It goes back to the late 80s, where they talked about office politics. And they talked about this as far as skills for managers in particular. And what they discovered was 2 axes, or axes, I quite phrase that properly, but you've got this kind of continuum from playing games, game playing, through acting with integrity. And then you've got awareness, political awareness. So am I aware this goes on, or am I oblivious to it? And what they did was to label this around animals. So rather than link this to people, and we're very good at labeling things, so they thought, well, actually, we'll use animals to kind of describe it and the traits that we recognize in animals. So one of the animals they talk about is a donkey. Now, a donkey is politically naive, but they act out of self-interest, hence why they're in this kind of bottom quadrant here in terms of that. So they are likely to show you that they're not happy. And what do donkeys do? Well, they kick, don't they? So you don't want to be in the way of a donkey when it starts to kick. So they play up because they're not happy, but they kind of show their dissent in terms of that. Then we've got the fox. Now the fox is clever. The fox is very politically aware, but they are acting out of self-interest, and they will put their needs before others. Now I'm imagining, and we haven't completed the grouping here, but I'm imagining you are already starting to identify the donkeys and the foxes in your organization. You'll know instantly who they are. You'll know what sort of behaviors these people are demonstrating. So you'll start to make those connections, and that's okay. And Graham's going to share a few more when I've finished talking about this fox. The thing about a fox is, whilst they're working in their own interests, if you can align their interests with yours, and by yours that could be your team or the organization, they can help you make stuff happen. Because what they are is they're really good at working out how to influence. They're really good at getting their way. And if that way is the same as yours, well, why would you not use a fox in order to get stuff done? The caveat, the warning, the red flag is all about understanding, making sure their motivation is aligned with yours. And if it is, they're going to serve your needs. If it's not, then you might end up with something than you imagined. So foxes, think about them in terms of how you can use them, but be really careful how you do, would be the watchword, I think.
Yeah.
Graham, what about sheep?
Because we move, and also I think it's worth saying, Rick, isn't it? It's not, foxes and donkeys aren't always kind of to the far left of this, and the other two aren't, sheep, and the other one's not to the far right. They could be anywhere in these quadrants, but it's this difference between game playing and integrity, or ethical and unethical, as we kind of phrase it. But if we think about the sheep, we use the term about people being sheep a lot, but typically here the innocence around this is people in this category tend to be politically naive. But what they do is they always act in the group's interest or the organization's interest because they think it's the right thing to do. So they're not playing a political game in any shape or form. They're doing it just because it feels like it's the right thing to do. Tend to be loyal to the organization, tend to be industrious and work hard to do the right thing. The challenge around sheep and their innocence is that they can be easily led. And of course, it's who leads them. And which leads us into the fourth character, the fourth animal that came from the research, which is the owl, the wise old owl. And the recognition here is there are people in organizations who are politically aware of the situation, of the impact of the situation, of kind of what's going on, the environment that they work in. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the environment in a minute as well. But when they're asking how to do things, they're asking with good intent, and the overarching goal of the organization and the people that work in it. They're loyal, they possess integrity, and tend to be respected by their colleagues. So again, if we think about kind of from a sheep category, ideally, if sheep need to be led, then we want them to be led by the wise old owl rather than by the clever fox or the inept donkey. So it's just a really simple way of starting to think about kind of where people might be, and possibly even where we might see ourselves. And I know we'd all like to go, well, I think I always act with integrity, and hopefully we do, but at times are we, moving a little bit more to the left-hand side. So I thought we use this a lot, haven't we? It's an interesting piece of work in terms of identifying the players. And I guess that leads us on to how do we then navigate office politics?
Yeah, before we do, I just want to let you know that we've got an exercise in the toolkit that is about helping you to recognize these people and think about them as their behaviors, not necessarily them as individuals. It's about how they play the game, so to speak. And we've got some practical things that you can do in order to work with them. And Graham's our wise old owl, by the way, just so you know.
That's very kind of you.
So how do you do it then? What do you think, Graham?
Well, I think the first thing, and we've kind of used the phrase about understanding the what's going on in the organisation. I think it's important to understand the political terrain around us. And a guy called Michael Jarrett wrote for Harvard Business Review and highlighted a couple of considerations, which was going to lead us to. I think the amount of work we do, Ricky, quite often we see a 4-box grid type approach to things, don't we?
Yeah, the good old-fashioned Boston matrix.
Yeah, and it works. So why change it? So two considerations here. The first is, where is a political activity taking place? Is it at an individual level, i.e. between two individuals or small groups of individuals? Or is it organizational level? Is it part of the culture that you operate in? And then secondly, where's the source of power? Is that source of power informal, gained through building relationships? Or is it formal, linked to a position or a hierarchy? And what this presents us with is 4 different landscapes. So Jarrett guided us towards 4 things to consider. The first one is, are we in the weeds? And as you can see, this is where personal influence and informal networks kind of rule. It's a dynamic that grows naturally without any maintenance, just like the weeds in your garden. And there can be some benefits to kind of this kind of activity, where informal networks are, as you would guess, used positively, getting others on board to effect change. But as weeds grow in your garden, they can be negative. And if you're stuck in the weeds, perhaps you need to get involved enough to understand the informal networks. And if they're being used for good, who are the key players and can you align with them? But if the key players are doing more harm than good, maybe it's an isolation strategy we need to think about, or developing strong counter arguments and strengthening connections with other players. So we can be stuck in the weeds, or we can be in the woods. And what the woods are, it's more of informal processes, the kind of things that are implicit in organizations, unspoken routines that all organizations have. It's the way we do things around here, but the type of stuff that's not written down. And whilst there can be some kind of safety and cover for people here, it can be bewildering, and we can get lost. We can get lost in the woods. So if we are here, if we find ourselves stuck here, that phrase about differentiating the wood from the trees, what's stopping things progressing? Rather than focus on the tree in front of you, look at the wider terrain. Don't just get stuck on the symptoms. Look at the environment and work out what the norms are in your organization, and are they helping things or are they holding them back? But it might be making the stuff that's implicit explicit. And the way to do that is to ask the stupid question. And I am one of those people in meetings who goes, I've got a stupid question to ask. But by asking the stupid questions, sometimes we can uncover stuff. So we've got the woods. We then move to the high ground. And the high ground combines formal authority with your systems within your organization, the rules, the structure, your policies, your procedures. And all this forms a basis of your political activities. And whilst there clearly are benefits to having rules and procedures, it can make things too bureaucratic. And that can stifle or prevent innovation and change from happening. If we're in the high ground, what we can do is use feedback from clients and customers and end users. Might highlight difficulties we don't see, or highlight where perhaps it's our structure that's constricting stuff. And what the danger might be, we might be more adverse if we're stuck in bureaucracy. So sometimes it can be set up kind of an independent workforce or task force to examine issues. And then the final landscape they looked at is the rocks. And this is where it's individual actions, interactions within the formal sources of authorities, where people are using title, role, expertise, might be access to a scarce resource, or having ties to someone that's high status within your organization. And if we're down here, recognizing that there are formal sources of power, how do we draw on those rather than fight against them? How do we use them for the wider benefit? And if we recognize that there's an individual here, like say a dysfunctional leader, maybe it's, do we need to pull together like a reasoned argument or appeal to their own interests in light with the wider interests of the organization? So again, just another interesting piece of work that goes, where are your politics? What level is it at? And is it about informal or formal power?
Okay, Graham. Well, thank you for that. Anybody who's worked with us will recognize this instantly, but we will talk a lot about relationships, and the quality of your relationships will determine how easy it is to get stuff done. And that is kind of politics in action. You might not think of it that way, but your ability to influence actually comes from the quality or the strength of your relationships. And we use a pyramid that we've adopted from a guy called John Timperley. He actually uses it in terms of complex sales. He uses it in consultancy and things like that. But we love this because we think it's got so many other applications. And what he talks about is these 6 levels of relationship. So if we work up from the bottom, you've got acknowledgement. And acknowledgement is, I kind of know you exist, but I don't know whether you have any value to add. So I kind of know you're there, but I don't know anything more than that in reality. And then we move to understanding. And understanding is about, well, I get what you do and I get your proposition, but I make no connection with it. Now, your proposition might be what you do as a job. It might be what your role is, what your team does, how it serves the organization and the role that it plays within that. So I kind of get we've got finance over here or HR over there and they do some stuff, but I don't necessarily connect that with anything of value to me. Unless it's payday, of course. And if you've not been paid, then HR will probably be somebody you're looking to build a relationship with. So there's elements around that. Where it gets interesting, though, is acceptance, because this is where I get you. I get that what you're doing adds value in some way. And we see this as a key stage in the relationship, because if somebody gets you and gets the value that you add, now we can start to have a conversation about, so how do we work together and how do we achieve some of this stuff using your strengths and my strengths in order to move that forward. So below that, it's really about how do we get to acceptance? Well, we need to spend some time. We need to invest some time getting to know people. And getting to know people doesn't start with what you can do. It starts with what they do, what pressures and pains they have. So start from a seek to understand basis rather than, I need all these things, because that's you just laying out your to-do list and hoping that they're going to help tick some things off that. Where relationships are strong, it's where we work together and understand each other. As you kind of progress, what you move through is to respect. And respect means I not only get what you do, but I get that you can offer more than just somebody who might do something for us. Actually, you have a perspective. You might even have some relationships that I could do with. And actually, your opinion on things now matter. And then you can move through to trust, because trust is all about, well, if you say you're going to do something, you're going to do something. And I trust that you've got my interests at heart as well as your own. And therefore, I'm prepared to work with you because we've got a strong relationship going on. And actually, there comes a point where those relationships will turn into friendships. And this is where the relationship might even develop outside the organization. This is where we start to socialize and spend time. The challenge with bond relationships are that they're really hard to maintain. They take time, because if you are at this level of relationship, you're investing a lot of time in each other. And therefore, having too many will become overwhelming. The reality is, in business terms, anything around acceptance through to trust is absolutely fine. The higher, the better, because you'll get more done, and you'll get more done easily. Because when things go wrong, as they do, if you've got a trust relationship, it's a lot easier to work it through. It's a lot easier to find a solution. If we're just getting to know each other, we start to go, oh, how's this happened? What's your role in this? What's my role in this? And we'll start to revert perhaps to protecting our interests if we're not careful. So being more impactful in our quality of our relationships can really make an impact and a difference in the way that we do business. And we use this in teams. cross-functional teams, in organizations, in sales, in just about everywhere and anywhere. So this is a real powerful tool. And again, in your toolkit, you'll find some templates that can work with you and some examples about how you can move the needle up that pyramid to improve the quality of relationships.
Thanks, Erica. I think it's a great model, and we've been using it for years now, and in a variety of ways. And I think aligned with that is, if you're going to build your relationships, you need to think about how you develop your people skills. Depending on the level that you're at, and there are a few things for us here. In terms of when we think about our skills, how do we manage the differences? How do we manage, where you and I don't see eye to eye, and we might have a difficult situation that we're trying to work our way through. But how do you manage that assertively in terms of understanding what you want from it, as well as helping the other person get what they want from it? How do you resolve conflict? We've used the ethical word, the integrity word, but how do you maintain personal integrity throughout all of this? Understanding what your values are and standing up for what you believe is really important here, because ultimately how people remember you is your brand and your reputation. Developing your emotional intelligence, that piece around being self-aware and how you self-regulate in terms of your own emotions, but also having an awareness of others, understanding kind of when someone's not at their best and therefore might need either some quiet time or some support, spotting all those things, kind of how we manage our emotions collectively. And then I guess the obvious one is, how do we develop our communication skills, particularly in terms of when we're building relationships, the active listening. We're listening. The intent of us listening is to understand. We're not listening just to respond. And understanding body language. What are we putting out in our body language, and what are others telling us through the signals they're giving out, the more subconscious stuff. There's definitely something about developing our people skills around that.
And we do loads of work on these things, don't we, Graham? It's particularly around, communication. Every organization, without fail, that we work with, you ask them what their number one issue is, and it's communication. Yeah. And yet, the reality is, with strong relationships, with some alignment in what we're trying to achieve, actually we can make such a massive impact just by talking to each other, but talking to each other starting by, what do you need, as opposed to what do I need?
Yeah.
And if you start from that aim of understanding, then actually you'll start to make some real inroads in terms of your performance as an organization, as a team. Okay, so you might want to be hiding away from the politics around you, but the reality is you can't hide from them forever. They are around you. How you navigate them is more the challenge, not if you can. Because if you don't, think about Graham's example earlier, what happens is, if we're not promoting ourselves, our colleagues are. So we do that in the right way, though. But think about, how do we keep our friends close, but our enemies closer? That old phrase. Work out who the gossips and manipulators are, but be courteous and guarded around them. Try to understand their goals. Don't get involved in that, because that's going to be a problem. But what we're kind of saying here is, be brave. Work out who's who, and work out, how do we work out what's going on, so that we're not mirroring their behavior, but actually what we are is working out, how do we work alongside them without getting involved in some of that noise and some of that challenge.
I think that leads to more tips. Yeah, in terms of where we see the negative politics going on, the stuff that we probably came into this session thinking office politics was all about, but where we see the negative side of things, how do we neutralize it? And the biggest one is resist joining in. It's really easy for us to get stuck into those conversations and get sucked into those conversations, thinking about kind of, we used to talk about the sheep, getting drawn into those things. So actually, let's not add fuel to the fire. Let's avoid passing on rumors and gossip. Where we can avoid taking sides, particularly if the sides are, if one side is, not going to help the organization to move further forward. and avoid getting sucked into conflict for the sake of getting sucked into conflict. Remaining professional, understanding. I mentioned your values and all those kind of things are important, and falling in line with organizational values, and being confident and assertive. And I think assertiveness sometimes get a bit misunderstood. I think people think assertive is me going, this is all about me, and therefore I am assertive. Well, actually, assertive it's partly that, but it's also making sure that we're working with the other person to get what they want, and avoiding being aggressive. Where aggressive is either the physical aggression or the anger that we see, or aggression at its simplest level is just, I'm going to get what I want from this, regardless of what you want.
Sounds like donkeys these do, Graham.
Yeah. Yeah, don't get kicked.
Don't get kicked and don't kick.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to kind of give you a little bit of a summary then, it's not about office politics. In reality, it's about organizational politics. This involves everybody. So we might think it happens in certain areas. It's happening all the time and it's happening everywhere. But watch out for those political behaviors, particularly your foxes. What are their interests? What are their motivations? What are they trying to get out of this? A really skillful fox, you might not necessarily find out without building a relationship, without working out and spending time with them to understand what is it that's really important to them. Don't guess is kind of the message here. And then learn how to navigate politics and power is really important. Working out who are the movers and shakers? How do they get stuff done? How do you align with them in order to make sure that they become allies and advocates for what you're trying to achieve, as opposed to adversaries where they're competing against you for resources? But if everything you do is in the best interest in the organization and you can articulate that, then my guess is you're going to win more than you lose. I'm not saying you're going to win every time, but you're going to win more than you lose, because if you can articulate the difference that you're going to make with you and your team for the organization, then I think that's a really good platform on which to build. And we've got some time for Q&A. So I did put a little question in the chat.
No questions came up in the chat when you popped the question in the chat. So I guess, having heard what we've heard now, what questions have people got? Either about the content or about how to apply it. I think just while we're waiting, Ricky, to see if anything comes in, I think one of the I guess it's kind of a question, but sometimes I guess it's an observation people make. But when we talk about kind of building relationships and some of the stuff that we've talked about, people do have that concern that is this me manipulating people? And I think, the stuff that we've talked about there, my take on that is, if people have that thought in their mind, it's back to the phrase we've used more than once, back to the intent behind it, isn't it? If I'm the guy that says I'm Machiavellian, then therefore there's a good suggestion that my intent's not going to be good when I'm doing things. But these presented can be used with good intent or not, can't they?
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is exactly that. It's about intention. It's about, are we working with the best interests of the team and the organization at heart? And if we are, and we can articulate that, and often the skills here aren't whether you're playing politics. You probably are, because you're influencing, but it's influencing through the lens of an owl as opposed to the lens of a fox or the lens of a donkey. A sheep's not going to influence, because they're kind of going, well, just tell me what you need from me and I'll do it.
Yeah.
So the owl, the reality is there are too few of these, because everybody else is kind of playing games, and they're trying to create this kind of overlap that says, no, this is how we do things and this is why it's important. And it always comes back to, some of the webinars we've done recently. Are we clear about what, why, and do we have a level of belief we can make that happen? It's when we don't have belief, we start to then go, so how do I do this then? And is my default self-interest, or is my default to work out, right, how do we do this so the organization benefits?
Yeah. Yeah. There's no questions. There's thanks a lot for the webinar. Very useful to make me think deeper, and no questions models very helpful and clear. So what else have we got to help people with, Ricky? Then you mentioned a toolkit.
Yeah. So Graham and I, whenever we put one of these sessions on that we do every month, what we're trying to do is go, what can we leave you with that is impactful? And this is just an example of the toolkit where you've got practical tools and information that are all designed to help you be better tomorrow than you are today. There's loads of resources that we have available to support you as well. In fact, what I should do is put the link up on here. There we go. So there's the link. In fact, what I'll also do for you, if I can navigate my computer, is I'll grab the link and drop it in the chat for you. You're probably seeing that because I'm sharing my screen.
And it's Eric, when we pull the webinar together and also any supporting information, it builds on what stuff we've talked about today. There's usually a bit more detail in the tool pack as well. So if you found the content today useful and helpful, then I'm sure you'll find the toolkit useful as well. And we have, Ricky mentioned this earlier, we have a wealth of free content on LinkedIn, YouTube. We have a monthly newsletter, Mindset Matters, and everything we do is designed, as Ricky said right from the outset, it's designed to kind of help people, get out their own way to support personal and professional growth. So if you want to kind of join our 2,000 followers on LinkedIn, or kind of our over 2,300 subscribers to a newsletter, and Ricky mentioned over 110,000 subscribers to YouTube. If you want to be part of that, then obviously click on join the relevant things, sign up, like, and share. It's all good stuff for us. And
so
yeah, thank you now, Ricky. That's all that's left.
Yeah, it's a massive thank you for those who took the time. We appreciate how busy you are. And we've got April. Next webinar will be 29th of April, where Graham and I will talk about the resilient mindset. And what we're really looking to do here, like we always do, is provide you with some tools to stay strong under pressure. Easy for me to say.
And it's been a popular topic over the more recent years, hasn't it? Resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the current climate will probably make that even more important in terms of adding to your tool set, adding to your skill set. So all remains is to thank you. Have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for joining us. And save the date, 29th of April, for the resilient mindset.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. See you next time.